Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nathan Stretch, and I'm the manager of community development for the Kitchener Public Library, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's event. Before we begin the program, I'd like to start with a territorial acknowledgement. As we gather, we are reminded that the library is situated on land that is the traditional home of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this community. And we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here and reaffirm our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. We wish to thank the City of Kitchener's Imagine It Fund for sponsoring this event. We also want to thank Penguin Random House Canada and publicista Aruta Learmonis for the support of this author event. And now to tonight's author event. I'm thrilled to be welcoming Nejwa Zabian virtually to Kitchener tonight, and I extend a welcome and thank you for Jasmine Kaur for agreeing to be tonight's interviewer. At this time, I'd like to introduce our interviewer, followed by tonight's special guest. So Jasmine Kaur is a writer, illustrator, and poet living on unceded Stalo territory. Her writing, which explores themes of feminism, womanhood, social justice, and love, acts as a means of healing and reclaiming identity. And as a spoken word artist and creative writing facilitator, she has toured across North America, the UK, and Australia to connect with youth through the power of artistic expression. Her debut poetry and prose collection, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, 2019, is available with Harper Teen in North America and with Penguin Random House in the Indian subcontinent. Her sophomore novel, If I Tell You the Truth, is available now with Harper Teen. You can find Jasmine on Instagram at JUSMUN. And Nejwa Zabian is a Lebanese-Canadian activist, author, speaker, and educator. Her best-selling books of poetry include Mind Platter, The Nectar of Pain, and Sparks of Phoenix. After self-publishing her first collection of poetry and prose, she went on to become a teacher and doctoral candidate in educational leadership. And she recently launched the digital school Soul Academy and the podcast Stories of the Soul. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Glamour, Elle Canada, and HuffPost, amongst others. At this time, I invite Nejwa and Jasmine to the screen for a conversation, followed by time for Q&A from viewers. Welcome, Nejwa and Jasmine.
Hello.
Hello, I am so happy to be here. I have been so excited for this event for just ever since you invited me. I have been it's like my favorite thing in the world to be able to interview authors. I think that as an author, you are often on the other side where you're writing and you're answering the questions, but then to be able to work with your peers and dig into the work that is so meaningful to you in like spaces like this is like everything to me. So I'm so thrilled that we get to have this conversation. And as you all can see, I have been going through the book, highlighting things, like pulling out my multicolored highlighters and my sticky notes, and just like leaving a note wherever I'm like snapping to myself and like just internally being like, yes, she said exactly what I was thinking. So I have been reading this book over the last week and have learned so much and have found so much resonance with just like the things that are happening in my own life, like very personally. Like coincidentally, like I've been having this conversation within myself of like, what is home? And then I'm always like coming back to this book every single day, like, oh yeah, like this is the conversation that I'm working on internally, like within the book that I'm currently reading. So the words in Welcome Home are like just so relevant to like my life, and I genuinely think that they're so going to be so relevant to the lives of so many women. So I am so grateful that I got to get my hands on this book a few days before it's released. So thank you for inviting me to host this event and trusting me with this space. So I actually heard about the book a few months ago when you reached out to me by DM on Instagram, because you wanted to use one of my poems, reference one of my poems in the book. And it was like an instant yes for me. I was so excited that it was. But there's like this whole beautiful story of like why that poem that I wrote spoke to you and and why you wanted to include it in the book. And I'll read out the poem just really briefly for context. The poem that I wrote reads, "Scream so that one day, 100 years from now, another sister will not have to dry her tears wondering where in history she lost her voice." So that's a poem that's really close to my heart as a poet, as the poet who wrote it. And I know that it's close to your heart. And there's a whole story of how you found that poem and how you read it to an audience. So I would love to just give you the floor right now to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that poem in particular had such an impact on my journey because I went from being this very quiet, good girl that always obeyed the rules, was always on everybody's good side, never really spoke up. Like anyone that you would ask about me would say, she's so kind, you know, she never gets upset over anything. And here I was going through an experience of power abuse and sexual harassment. And I was so ashamed of that because I was like, how did I put myself in a situation like that? Because that's how the environment that I grew up in shaped me to think. And so there was always this conflict of I have this pain on the inside that I really want to scream out and say, this happened to me and this wasn't right. This wasn't fair. But at the same time, I'm like, if I do that, then I won't be that good girl anymore. I won't be that perfect person who's never hurt anyone or never spoke badly about anyone. And so it was like this struggle between maintaining an image that, you know, I thought I needed to be my whole life. And I don't say those words lightly. I know people nowadays say that all the time, but I really mean like a list of identities and ways that I identified myself that genuinely did not serve me anymore because now it was the price of my voice. And so there's that side. And then there's the side that really wanted to scream and just didn't care about any of that because I knew it was the right thing. Because I would always tell people when I first started writing, I would always tell everyone, like, be authentic, be yourself. And if something that violates your boundaries happens, speak up about it. And you know, so what if people don't like you? So what if you ruin certain relationships or even with family, with community, with your religious community, with your cultural community? So what? Like at the end of the day, you have yourself. But I couldn't do that because I knew the price of it, but I also knew the price of not speaking up. So when I read those words, as you were reading them now, I actually got goosebumps again because when I read them, I was like, it is my responsibility to share what happened, not just for another woman 100 years from now, but for myself, so that in 20 years and in 50 years, I don't look back and say, why did I not say anything then? And to me, I just knew if I didn't speak up now, I was never going to speak up about something else that happened because I was always going to go back to this moment and say, well, I didn't speak up then. Why would I speak up now? And so I needed to scream those words, and they weren't like and I know that, you know, it's the word scream shows that someone is yelling or like they're screaming something really loud. But my words were strong, but I spoke them softly. And I never hurt anyone while I was telling the story. It was more like, this happened to me. And I understand that there were certain moments where I could have said no, where I should have said no, but I didn't know I had that power. So in a way, it felt like I got to a point where I was so deeply hurt and taken advantage of because I never had that voice that would eventually scream in the first place. I didn't know I had it. So after coming forward with the story, I was asked to give a speech at an International Women's Day event. And at the time, this was in 2018, at the time I was wearing the hijab. I had been wearing it since I was 13. And I was planning on making the speech about, you know, a woman can choose whatever she wants for herself, because I knew the kind of backlash I would get if I chose to take off my hijab. So I wanted this story to be about how a woman has the freedom to do whatever she wants with her body. And I wanted that speech to include, and this is gonna overlap with another question, so I won't make this comment. So it was going to be about me and the way I dress. It was going to be about religion and culture and how those two elements of a person's life really impact their life. But then 2 days before my speech, I get served with legal documents that say, do not mention this story of sexual harassment and power abuse at this event. We will have people watching. So immediately I was like, you're trying to silence me on International Women's Day? No, that's not going to happen. So I ripped up my speech and I wrote a new one, because I was like, I wasn't even going to talk about that. I spoke publicly about what happened for the public interest. It wasn't for me to, stand on stages everywhere and talk about it. But now you're threatening me and you're saying there's people, taking notes. So I stood on stage and I said, I heard there's people taking notes. So if you miss anything, raise your hand and I will repeat it. And I just felt the kind of power I had saying that was so, like, I just felt like I had wings of fire around me. And I talk in Welcome Home about how, like, as I was going up to the stage, I was so scared because I knew so many people. There were more than 700 people in the audience, and I knew the kind of judgment that would be there. I knew the kind of, like, they're going to be looking at me and thinking, and it was all like people who were like high up in companies. This was like a business thing. And from my own, people who knew me and who I knew. And but I say, like, but then I have to find this part. I say, but then I remember the girl who walked outside of that office feeling like a girl with broken wings. I remember the girl who was so terrified the night before she reported that she collapsed on the kitchen floor and screamed to her mother for help. I remember the look in my mom's eyes as she desperately, on the verge of tears, said, something is going on with you and you're not telling us. I remember the girl sitting in the investigator's office who started hyperventilating as soon as he told her the lies the witnesses had told. I remember her, and I become angry. The fire within me starts to rage, and as I'm walking on stage, I feel wings of fire surrounding me. I take with me every moment of anger, and I stand tall and proud. My voice trembles as I begin to read, but the more I speak, the more courage I have. And this takes me back to what I said earlier about how there isn't one moment that completely changes your life. There are a series of moments that feed each other. It's like a domino effect. I speak for 20 minutes, during which I look to the audience, not knowing who exactly is watching, but I know there are enough people there in positions of power who have the ability to effect injustice just as they do justice. And I want them to listen. I can see tears in many people's eyes, especially women, and I know it's because they know they've experienced what I experienced. I end my speech by raising the stack of papers I was served and saying, I will not apologize for telling my truth. I then read a poem by Jasmine Kaur, Scream so that one day, 100 years from now, another sister will not have to dry her tears, wondering where in history she lost her voice. Then I said, I screamed as loud as I possibly can. Will you scream with me? That's how I ended that speech. Like, that was, I'm tearing up right now, but that was so powerful for me, like, in my life. And this was 3 years before I wrote Welcome Home.
So I have like full body chills right now, and that was the first question. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I think like what you just shared really, to me as the reader, encapsulates what I'm experiencing reading the book, which is like this deep journey into that question of like, why can't we tap into our deepest selves? Why can't we find home within ourselves? And why can't we challenge all this like worldly crap that tells us what we can and cannot be? Like, why do we not feel like we can find our voices, and why does that feel so distant for so many of us? And I like I said when I was opening, like I think that so many of us are going through the exact same thing, just trying to find our voice in a world that has taught us, like, since our like birth as like young like girls, that our voices are not welcome, like that our voices need to be like shaped and molded and changed to fit somebody else's like comfort zone or needs, or like personal ideas about what a girl is allowed to be, or what a young woman is allowed to be. So like as I'm going through the book, I'm experiencing all of those questions like that you were asking yourself. And that conversation of like why is it that we don't feel like we can be our most authentic selves, or why are we so scared of raising our voices? Like I'm asking myself those questions, and I'm grateful that I'm getting to have that like internal work. So this has been like an amazing process just in the last week of going through the book. So going back to the beginning of the book, there's a section in the towards the beginning where you are talking about your hijab, and you're talking about your own personal relationship with identity, and that evolving relationship. But then you're also talking about how you're navigating your own relationship with who you are, but you're also dealing with a Western world that is telling you who you are. You're dealing with a Western world that is telling you that you're oppressed. This is how you're oppressed. This is how you get free. Oh, look, now you're liberated. All sorts of like, you know, very Western, like white supremacist ideas about like what we are allowed to be as women of color. And as you were sharing all that, like I was thinking about my own experiences as a Sikh woman, where I would get those things all the time from like strangers who feel entitled to be like, oh, like you're oppressed in this way, and this is how I'm going to liberate you. So I wanted to know, like, just where did that desire come from to bring that part of this issue into the conversation in your book? Like, why was that so important to mention and bring up a few times?
When I took my hijab off, I had some people congratulate me on being free. And I was like, wait a minute, don't tell me that my freedom is based on me taking this off. Because what I knew is every story that I carried with me was somehow veiled to everyone else around me under my hijab. It's like that's all they saw about me. And I felt in a way like someone else was telling me what my story was. Like, oh, I've been struggling for so long, and now magically that I took this off, I'm free and I'm okay. And that wasn't it at all. The freedom that I was aching for was the freedom of my voice. It wasn't the freedom of my hair or the freedom of my skin. I felt free when I was wearing the hijab because that was a choice I made. Yes, I was 13 years old, but the first time in my life that I was prompted to reflect on whether I wanted to wear it or not was when I was 19 in Canada. 3 years after arriving here, I was on my way to university, and this old white man who was sitting on the bus, who was just covered in tattoos, and I talk about this in Welcome Home, stared me down the whole way. And then as soon as he was about to jump off the bus, he looked at me and said, you know, you're in Canada, you don't have to dress like that. And it was that day that I was like, why do I wear this? Like, honestly, because when I was 13, I wanted to look like my sister, and I wanted to be a good girl. I didn't think of, you know, the bigger reasons for it. And I wanted to be closer to God. But really at 13, what do you know about that? So I thought about it. I'm like, do I take this off and just not risk going through an experience like this where it's so painful that I just started to cry? Or do I continue to carry this part of my identity that's been part of me for so long, and I'm not ready to let it go? It was like a safety blanket. Do I do that? Or do I choose courage and keep it on? So that day I chose courage. And from that day on, I continued to choose courage every morning before I wrapped it around my head. And then I say, in the day that I took it off, after reflecting on, you know, I was 28 at the time, and I had just moved out of my parents' house, which was also a very big deal because culturally speaking, you don't move out until you're married. Like, you move out to your husband's house, but I moved out into my own place. And it was the first time in my life that I experienced silence in such a beautiful, messy, then beautiful way. And there was one night where I was reflecting on my life, and I was imagining if a biography 100 years from now were to be written about me, what would it say? And I see, you know, Nejwa Zabian, Changed the World By. And then it hit me that the picture that I saw was a picture of me with my hair. That's how I saw myself, but that's not how I projected myself into the world. And so I knew that I had outgrown the idea that I needed to wear the hijab to be a good Muslim woman, to be a good daughter, to be a good part of the community that I belong to. I realized that I had shed that, and now I needed to start like showing that to myself and to the world around me. And so I say, on the day when I was 19, when I chose courage and continued to wear it, then I chose courage at 28 and took it off. It doesn't, so the the question of putting it on versus taking it off has absolutely nothing to do with whether you're courageous or not, whether you're free or not. So I wanted to correct that narrative that's like, this is what a liberated woman looks like. A liberated woman looks like whatever she wants to look like, whatever she chooses to look like, not whatever society believes that about her. And so, and I still had people who were like, oh, you're so oppressed, like you've given into the Western culture, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I need to make sure that neither side thinks that I believe that, you know, on this side, this is what made me free. And on this side, like, this is what was oppressing me, or now the way that I dress or showing my skin is also oppressive. Like, I wanted my story to be straight, which is, this is my choice. And I don't care how your eyes see me. Like, if you're a person who's not a person of color, or who's not a person who has a minority identity or belongs to one, and you judged me while I was wearing the hijab, I'm sorry, but your congratulations right now literally means nothing, because there's a human here. There's actually a poem that I read once, and it's in Welcome Home, where I was still wearing the hijab and I was still struggling with not coming forward with the story. And I stood on stage and I said, if I were to tell you my story, I wonder what story I would tell you. Do I tell you the story of the little girl who never felt she had a home? Do I tell you the story of the, you know, the 16-year-old who came to Canada? Do I tell you the story I list and list and list and list and list, and then I say, what story do I tell you when the only story that you see when you see me is this? And I pointed to my hijab. And then I said, it's as if at the end of the day, when I take this off, all of my worries go away and all of my troubles go away. That's not true, you know? So I wanted to make sure that that toxic negative narrative that a liberated woman looks a certain way is wrong. Because if you have that kind of mentality, I'm sorry, you definitely probably at some point victim blamed someone, victim shamed someone, because your idea of what liberation looks like has certain parameters outside of, it's whatever her choice for herself is.
Big yes to every single thing that you said there. And I especially loved like the way you described this idea of like what liberation is. Liberation is whatever a woman wants for her life. It's not it's not that one way is going to like liberate or oppress you and the other way is just going to be the opposite. It's however we choose to define ourselves as we're evolving and learning about who we are. And I also love like what you said. You mentioned briefly about like this idea of a good Muslim or a good daughter. And that leads me to my next question, which has to do with this concept that you speak very briefly about in the book, in the section I was just reading, which is this idea of a good woman. There's a particular quote that I was just reading. I highlighted it as I was reading it, and it read, so the poem that read, or sorry, so it wasn't a poem, it was a quote. It read, I believe that being good meant putting everyone else ahead of me, or just never putting myself ahead of anyone else, because the latter would somehow mean I was impure, selfish. I didn't understand that my upbringing with a mother as good as mine caused me to go about self-love in the wrong way. And you italicized the word good in there, and I was like, what? Because it's this idea that like our mothers are good, and our mothers have been taught that they are good because they are so like agreeable, and they are so like they're just so like kind and selfless, and they give everything to their husbands and their families and their mother-in-laws and their in-laws, and they just like almost like lose themselves to like be daughter-in-laws and to be mothers and to be this perfect person within the home. And it just made me really think about this concept of like a good woman, which is pervasive across the world in all cultures for centuries upon centuries, and is still very much like something that I see all the time today, like in the world that we're navigating. So throughout the book, you know, we have this thought-provoking conversation that you know, that we're trying to find our voices as individuals, as women, especially when we've had our voices stifled for so long. And you speak about some of your own struggles to assert your voice, your desires, your opinions when you were younger. And that made me just think, like, where do you think this definition of a good woman came from? Like, who does this definition serve, and how do we like begin to do that work of redefining it and changing it altogether?
Who does it serve? It serves men. That's the simple answer. And I tried, I try to speak about this topic as kindly as I can, because I'm not the type of person that I don't hate men. I love men, and I believe that there are amazing men out there. But the whole idea that a woman is only good when she does certain things for her husband and puts herself last. She does everything for the kids, she does everything for her husband, she does everything for her father, even, after she's married. She does everything that just puts her at the bottom of that priority list. That stemmed from men wanting to control women, historically speaking. Has that changed over time? Yes, but we've carried this idea that, like, it's not just an idea, it's like an ingrained, part of the foundation of the way that certain cultures function, is that a woman must put herself last to be considered pious, or to be considered pure, or to be considered like she's in her place, and I grew up in a tiny village in Lebanon where I could count on my fingers the number of women who were, educated, who went to school. All of my friends in Lebanon, because I attended an Islamic school up to grade 11, all of my friends were married by the second or third year that I was in Canada. So they would have been 18 or 19 years old. And so I grew up in a place where I very quickly understood that for me to be a good woman, I had to not raise my voice, not share my opinions. Um, there was this one like viral quote, what that once Instagram like first became big, it went viral, and it was like this woman that's like, I'll cook for you, I'll clean for you, I'll do the dishes, I'll do the laundry, I'll take care of the kids, blah, blah, blah. Just, we have this term in Arabic that's like, it means, uh, uh, like, it's like cover me, like give me protection, just give me that, as in marry me and give me that, and I'll do absolutely anything for you. And weirdly enough, when I saw that, this would have been like more than 10 years ago. I was like, aw, because that's how I grew up. And now I look at that and I'm like disgusted by it. But really, I think that stemmed from men wanting to control women. And I still see it to this day. Like my mom is she's an incredible human being, and I don't blame her for. I know I say like I didn't know that growing up with a mom as good as mine. She is really a good person, but she doesn't know how to say no. She doesn't know how to put herself first. She doesn't know how to, like, to her it feels like it's so out of her nature to do that. And I grew up wanting to be like her, because everywhere I would go, people would be like, your mom is the best. Like she does everything. You can never, like, you just mention something in front of her that you like and she does it right away. And I always wanted to be like her. And now I'm at a point where, like, I don't care if you think I'm mean. I don't care if you think that I'm not as kind as my mom, or like, where did I come from? I have boundaries, and I don't put other people ahead of me. I don't like expend every ounce of my energy trying to be seen as good by others. And also, like, another thing, like religiously speaking, when we talk about being a good woman, to me that's like being, always being like kind and soft spoken and not raising your voice and giving people the benefit of the doubt all the time. And I was like that. But I got to a point where I would be praying, because I used to pray 5 times a day. I don't pray 5 times a day anymore. My idea of prayer has changed over time. But I would be praying and I would be bawling my eyes out, because I'm like, I feel like I am giving so much power, like, away from myself. I could be doing something to change my situation, and instead I'm saying I'm going to be this quiet, soft-spoken girl that never speaks up, and God will one day speak up for me. And it felt wrong. It felt like God wanted me to speak up for myself. So and I talk about this in Welcome Home. I say my problem wasn't with God. My problem was with what people taught me about God. So that idea that, you know, for a woman to be good, she has to be X, Y, and Z, has that, historically speaking, was started by men. Yeah.
Thank you, like, just for everything that you are sharing. And like, I am sitting here awestruck by your authenticity and like the boldness with which like you speak, because I think that like when you are authentic in the way that you are, and you found this authenticity through all that internal work that you do, which is so evident through the book, it's like you are opening the doors for all of us to like be able to like be like our truest selves. So I'm so grateful. And you mentioned this idea of like moving away from the good woman concept that's been like shoved down our throats since we were like little girls. And I was thinking, like, as you were speaking of like, you know, how instead of being taught that we should want to be good women, we should be taught that we should be happy women. Like we should be able to like have that aspiration for ourselves, beyond like some worldly definition of goodness. And you also mentioned boundaries, which yes to boundaries. And that's been like this big thing in my 20s, like trying to figure out boundaries and how to like create happiness for myself and safety for myself. And I find that like when you're building boundaries, like it can be like amazing for you, but it can also be like really, really hard, and people can get mad about them because like they're just not always used to us having boundaries. So like, you know, what has that learning been like for you, and what have been like the road bumps in terms of like building those boundaries for yourself?
It's so hard to even consider that there is something called boundaries when you grow up in an environment where it's very enmeshed. Like what you go through immediately affects everyone around you, and what everyone around you goes through immediately affects you. It's like you're not even your own person. And this idea that you sacrifice your own happiness for the happiness of everyone else around you, it's like it's not even like explicitly taught to you. It's taught to you in education. We refer to it as the hidden curriculum. It's like you're getting taught it, but you're not, it's not written anywhere. Like you can't prove it. But you know, I grew up with like, I think of everyone around me and how any decision that I do, because reputation is such a big thing in my culture and in my religion. It's a very big thing. And I was like so bound to that just being able to say, you know what, like, no, I don't want this for myself. I'm not comfortable with it. It seems like, so I'll give you an example. When I was I was 26 and I went to Lebanon, and I was not feeling like I was really depressed during that time because everything that was happening related to the story I shared earlier. And when I got there, everyone's like, "Oh, why aren't you married yet? Like you're 26, you're getting old." And I knew that, like by their standards, I was getting old, and I would just say like, you know, the right time hasn't come. And then it got to a point where I was like, you know what? No, I'm not comfortable with people asking me that question. So I started saying like, stop asking me those questions. I don't want to get married right now. I'm not ready to get married right now. And it was like to people who were much older than me, and my mom would be like, stop talking like that, you know, they don't understand. And I'm like, but they are making me very uncomfortable. Like, why do I have to put my comfort as just, you know, it's too much. Like it comes all the time, and it comes in a way that's like, there must be something wrong with you for you to not be married by this age. Like, did something happen? And so that's when I first started, even with my own family, just started saying like, I'm not ready to get married right now. I don't want to. I'm not looking for that. And you know, my parents never really pushed marriage on me, but then again, when I would like speak back to people, they would say like, you know, don't say that, or you know, like that again, because on some level, obviously they're thinking, you know, we raised a good daughter, we don't want people to think, you know, and it's coming from an innocent place for them. But my understanding of boundaries grew over the last few years. So I'm 31 right now. That happened when I was 26. I would say I only became strong with like, you know, the big boundaries, like things that had to do with my self-worth and with my time and with the value that I know I have. That's been over the last couple of years. And the way I see it is, it's not, you don't draw a boundary or build a boundary to change someone's behavior or to manipulate them into changing their behavior. Your goal of setting a boundary is, I see a certain value within me and I want to protect it. So the focus isn't on the protection aspect of it. The focus is on seeing the value of what you have within. So I give the example of, if you had diamonds and you believe diamonds are valuable in your home, like, would you just throw them anywhere? No, like, you know what, they require to be well taken care of. So think of all the great qualities you have within you. Think of your time. Think of the love that you have to offer. Are those not such valuable things that you own within? So why don't you ensure that no one is overstepping in a way where you don't feel like you're not taking care of those qualities or values that you have within? So I see boundaries more as like, I'm not protecting myself against something, I'm protecting what I have within because I see the value in it. And yeah, that's come, become clear to me over the last couple of years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I really appreciate this idea of like considering our qualities as diamonds, because like, again, like as girls and women, we are not taught to love ourselves in that way. And we're not taught to like see ourselves as so precious and valuable the way that we're taught to see external things as valuable.
no.
So I love this idea of like thinking about those qualities in myself as diamonds that need to be protected. And if you have something worth protecting, you are going to work really hard to make sure that those boundaries and those safety nets are like in place, and you're not going to be like flimsy about them. So I love that.
Yeah.
So before I go and open up the floor to audience questions, the audience can send us questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll answer some of them here. I have one last question on my end for you, which
Yes.
is, like being 28 myself, I know that I am not the same person in any way that I was when I was 18 or 19. Like I've gone through this huge evolution and growth process within myself as I've been redefining home again and again and again, and trying to welcome myself into my home of my own soul and spirit outside of like external conditioning. But I always like wonder what it would be like to be able to have a conversation with our younger selves. So if you could speak to like 19-year-old Nejwa, what would you say? What is like one thing that you would really want her to know, like from where you are right now?
I would want her to know that she has every right to discover who she really is, and without feeling like she's being too much or betraying the people around her or betraying where she came from. I would tell her, because I'm thinking back to her, she genuinely had no idea who she was. Her view was just, I'm pleasing this person, I must be good. I'm pleasing this person, I must be good. It was literally out, my definition of who I was outside of me altogether. So I look at her and I say, you do not need the approval or acceptance of those around you, whether it's friends or family or community, or to be okay. You don't need you don't need to be a certain person in the future, like a fabricated image that everyone around you has constructed for you. Like, stop running after that woman that you believe you need to be the best that you can be. Like, stop thinking that one day a man will come and save you. No one can save you. Stop thinking that a man one day will come. And the reason I'm saying a man is like a husband, as in someone who's going to like protect you and take care of you and love you. Like, no, stop, that's what I would tell her.
I feel that like like every single level. It just like takes me back to like, in my own life, like thinking back to like how as when we're going through challenging things, we've been taught culturally and socially that like everything gets better when you get married. And no, that's
Yeah.
not how it works whatsoever.
Yeah.
And real life comes and tells you that. And it's like over the course of my 20s, like I've seen my friends go through like so much all around me in terms of like relationships and like abuse and marital challenges. And that resonates so deeply with this idea that you know, like life is not these very problematic fairy tales that we are like ingrained with in all sorts of ways as like young girls. And I'm so grateful that we get to like break down those fairy tales as we grow and like, you know, share our stories. So now
Yeah,
I'm
you're
going to
taught.
open, yeah, I'm going to
Yeah.
open the floor to the questions from the audience.
Yes.
So I have a question here from Sarah. So Sarah asks, can you talk a bit about journaling and its benefits? I wrote as a teen, but it's been decades since I put my feelings to paper, and I have trauma from my mother reading my diary. So yeah, what would you say about that?
I will tell you that journaling is what saved me. Journaling is what brought me home to myself. Before I even self-published anything, before anyone even knew who Nejwa is, I would sit in a coffee shop for hours and just write. And it always began with, how am I feeling right now? I would start by, I'm feeling this, or I'm thinking this. And then I would find myself beginning in the now and going all the way back to, you know, wherever in my childhood this stemmed from. But I wouldn't have gotten there without starting with what I'm thinking and feeling right now. I feel like writing begins, and Jasmine, you probably agree with this, it begins with, you know, you can control how you start, but you cannot control where you end up. Like it ends up leading you somewhere. It ends up leading you to a place of healing, and it ends up, sometimes it's a really messy place, but it unveils for you certain things that could not become clear to you without like that thought process that leads you in that direction of where you need to be. So I'm sorry that someone read your journal, your mom read your journal at some point. I'm pretty sure for her it was like, I need to know what she's going through so that I can, whatever the intention was, the impact was done. So I apologize for that, but I would say don't let that deter you from doing the work that you need to do for yourself. Don't let that deter you from, you know, spilling your heart out on paper and your mind and your soul and getting to that place of healing. And actually in Welcome Home, one of the strategies that I have in, I believe it's in the surrender room, is write it out. And the only rule is just write it out as it is. Don't think someone will read this one day and what will they think. Just write it out as it is, as raw, authentic as maybe it shows you in a bad light. Who cares? You're coming home to who you really are on the inside. We all have things about us that, you know, we're ashamed to admit we have, but not admitting them doesn't make them go away. So make sure that you just write it out as it is and be as honest with yourself as you possibly can be, and just, you know, put a lock on that journal, or don't allow anyone to ever know that you have one, or just don't let that deter you, because that's such a loss for you.
Thank you for that answer. So another audience member asks, how can you action your freedom if your own family oppresses you with all the fear of losing them if you speak up against them?
Okay, so this is, the family matters are very, very sensitive, and I get that. It's so hard to speak up. So this is what I say. If your family is this important to you, then I'm pretty sure that you believe that your family should be the number one entity in the world that loves you as you are, right? The number one entity in the world that should see you, empower you, hear you, love you, care for you, no matter what. If they are choosing to not do that, that does not mean that you continue living your life in a way that is inauthentic to you, just so that they could say, I love you, or make you feel like they love you. Because here's the thing, if you are pretending to be someone you're not, And that could just be that you're silencing yourself. If you're silencing yourself, you're still pretending to be someone you're not. If you do that, then you are manufacturing an image for them to say, she's worth it, or he's worth it, or they're worth it. But your authentic self on the inside is not the one that's worth it. So you're still going to feel alienated while you're in that context, even more than you would feel alienated if you actually took that step to separate yourself from them. And unfortunately, sometimes you do have to draw that line between, you know, who you thought or how you thought your relationship with your family should evolve and how it's actually evolving. And one time, my therapist told me this. She said, the people who, this was years ago, and it was such a massive moment for me. The people who have a problem with the direction that you're going, it's like you're growing so much and so beautifully, they can't keep up with that, because if they do, then that will wake them up to all the growth they need to do, that because of their own shame and because of whatever it is that they carry, they're just not willing to do it. So don't take their lack of ability to see you as you grow and validate you as you grow and stay in your life as you grow. Don't take that as an indication that you need to chop yourself up. Like if we're talking about a plant growing and just, you know, living a stagnant life just to say they love me, they accept me. And I know it's hard, but you have to see it this way.
Thank you for that answer. That like really speaks to me personally. Like I totally hear you. And I think that like, again, we're socialized to believe that like that conditional love is like the love that we should be aspiring towards within our family. Like we need to be able to maintain that. But like when you grow out of it and you step out and you realize that love, that conditional love is like not enough and it's not authentically loved, then it's like that's when I feel like part of that growth happens and that journey inward happens. So I really, really resonate with what you said. So another question here is, what are other authors and books that inspire you?
Well, Jasmine inspires me clearly from the beginning of this interview or conversation. Khalil Gibran, who is, I would doubt you don't know who that is, but he's a Lebanese poet. He wrote The Prophet. Mahmoud Darwish, who's a Palestinian poet, Nizar Qabbani. They're all dead now, except for Jasmine, but their words just remind me of the universality of emotion and feeling. And also, before I forget, every time I read their words, I know that if at their time a woman wrote what they wrote, she would be mocked. And I always think to myself, like, they were so actually like brave to talk about things that even the men around them would have thought, oh, a poet like talking about feelings? No. So that really empowers me to, you know, change things not only for women but also for men. So yeah, those are the authors.
Thank you. So I think this will be our last question before we get back to the library.
Yes.
What is next for you? You have so much still to say and offer. So like, what do you feel is next, like professionally, creatively, like just for your soul and spirit?
Well, now that I've made the transition from strictly writing poetry and prose to actually writing, you know, self-development and sharing more of my life, I would like to, I'm at a point in my life where I want to see what doors open. I don't have a plan. And what feels right to me right now is to continue spreading this message of, you know, building a home within yourself and, you know, being that home, like that you come home to at the end of the day. And I feel like it's not a message that you just put out and you just say, well, it will reach whoever it reaches. I feel like it really needs to be given so much attention. So I'm going to be creating as much content as I can to continue spreading this message. And whatever comes next, it's going to be a natural evolution of all the lessons I learned through writing Welcome Home, through coming to all those realizations that you don't always have to have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, or you just do the next best thing that feels right for you, and just be willing to have that free spirit that it doesn't think like, oh, once I get there, I'll be safe and there's nothing else I have to do. Like, I want to live, I want to be alive, I want the message to be alive. So I'm sorry if that answer disappoints you, but
I love it. That is exactly what I'm feeling in my heart. So like, thank you for sharing that. So with that, I think we're going to close our Q&A. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for
thank you.
joining me in this conversation, for sending me like this amazing book that I'm still working through and cannot wait to finish. Like, I speak for a lot of us when I say that we're going to be very like closely following your journey from here. And if this conversation has spoken to you, like, that is what this book is, and you need to get your hands on it wherever books are sold, because it is everything and more. So thank you so much for this conversation. Pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to connecting offline again. And thank you to everyone who attended and to everyone at the library.
Oh, and so on behalf of KPL, thank you both so much for the depth and resonance of this conversation. The interplay of artistry, analysis, emotion, and action was palpable and affecting. What a gift.
Aw.
A gift wrought of your good work.
Aw, thank you. You're so sweet. You're so kind.
And to tonight's audience, our gratitude to each of you for choosing to spend some of your evening with us, and for your questions. I know we couldn't get to all of them, but one lucky viewer will receive a copy of Najwa's Welcome Home. We will contact the winner by email tomorrow. And as we do with all of our 85 Queen events, we'll be posting this talk on the library's YouTube channel, and we invite you to view again and share it with others. So keep an eye on social media and our website for details about 85 Queen events. We're preparing for late this summer and fall 2021. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a fabulous weekend. Stay safe and see you soon.